In the last days of his life, Muammar Gaddafi faced the collapse of his regime that had lasted more than 40 years. Amid bombings, urban combat, and betrayals within his own forces, the Libyan dictator watched his empire crumble while he tried to escape the siege closing in on Sirte, his final stronghold. In this video, we will follow step by step the dramatic last hours of Gaddafi, from the risky escape with his closest circle to the moment when he was captured by the rebels. Get ready. Born near Sirte, into a poor Bedouin family, Gaddafi became an Arab nationalist at a young age, studying in Sabha and later at the Royal Military Academy of Benghazi. Within the armed forces, he formed a revolutionary group that overthrew the Western-backed monarchy of Idris I in a 1969 coup d'état. Upon taking power, he transformed Libya into a republic governed by the Revolutionary Command Council, expelled the Italian population, and closed Western military bases. He sought alliances with Arab nationalist governments, especially with Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt, advocating for pan-Arab unity, but without success. He introduced Sharia as the basis of the legal system, promoted Islamic socialism, nationalized the oil industry, and used the resources to strengthen the army, finance foreign revolutionaries, and implement social programs, including housing, health, and education. In 1973, he launched a cultural revolution with the creation of the Basic People's Congresses, presented as direct democracy but maintaining personal control over key decisions, and released his third international theory in the Green Book. In 1977, he officially transformed Libya into the Jamahiriya, assuming a symbolic role but maintaining command over military and revolutionary committees that ensured repression and internal policing. During the 1970s and 1980s, he became involved in border conflicts with Egypt and Chad, supported foreign militants, and was implicated in the Lockerbie bombing, becoming internationally isolated. Relations with the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel became especially hostile, leading to American bombings in 1986 and UN sanctions. Beginning in 1999, Gaddafi abandoned pan-Arabism, approached the West, and advocated for Pan-Africanism, presiding over the African Union between 2009 and 2010. In 2011, during the Arab Spring, protests against corruption and unemployment erupted in eastern Libya, sparking a civil war that culminated in NATO's intervention alongside the National Transitional Council, overthrowing the government and resulting in Gaddafi's capture and death in Sirte. A highly polarizing figure, Gaddafi was the target of a personality cult and praised for his anti-imperialist stance, support for Arab and African unity, and social improvements. However, many Libyans criticized his reforms, accusing him of authoritarianism, human rights violations, funding terrorism, and, posthumously, sexual abuse. Now going back a few years during the 1970s and 1980s, which is very important for you to understand the overall context. During this period, Gaddafi became known worldwide for his radical ideas and for supporting armed groups in other countries. He was accused of involvement in terrorist attacks, including the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, in 1988, which killed 270 people, resulting in heavy international sanctions against Libya for years. At the same time, Gaddafi tried to present himself as a pan-African and pan-Arab leader, advocating for the unity of African countries and seeking to be a strong voice against the West. In the 2000s, he began to soften his image, abandoning weapons programs, re-establishing relations with Western countries, and trying to rebuild Libya's economy. However, internally, many Libyans lived in dissatisfaction. The country was under tight regime control, political parties were banned, freedom of expression did not exist, and corruption was widespread. Oil wealth remained concentrated in the hands of the elite, while Gaddafi and his family enjoyed luxury, and much of the population faced hardship. When protests broke out in February 2011, it was no surprise that thousands of people mobilized. In Benghazi, the unrest began after uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt overthrew their leaders, giving rise to the Arab Spring. The mobilization began on February 15th, when families of political prisoners demanded the release of lawyer Fathi Terbil, arrested for denouncing the Abu Salim prison massacre, where more than 1,200 detainees had been killed by Gaddafi's forces. The protest quickly spread, and on February 17th, the Day of Rage, thousands of Libyans filled the streets of Benghazi, Baida, Tobruk, and Derna. Instead of allowing peaceful demonstrations, security forces opened fire, killing more than 230 people in 4 days. The repression only increased resistance, leading military units to defect and helping rebels take key cities. By February 24th, much of eastern Libya was no longer under Gaddafi's control. The opposition organized itself into the National Transitional Council, officially formed on February 27th in Benghazi, with the goal of planning a new Libya without the dictator. Meanwhile, Gaddafi remained in Tripoli and the surrounding areas in the west of the country, with elite forces such as the Qamis Brigade, led by his son Qamis Gaddafi, equipped with tanks and artillery. The regime also hired foreign mercenaries from countries like Chad, Mali, and Niger to contain the protests. In early March 2011, the situation reached a critical point. Gaddafi's forces used heavy weapons, tanks, and air power to retake cities controlled by the rebels, bombing civilians, especially in Benghazi and Ajdabia. Images of destroyed civilian neighborhoods increased the fear of a massacre if Gaddafi reached Benghazi. On March 12th, the Arab League called for a no-fly zone over Libya, while France and the United Kingdom pressed the United Nations. On March 17th, the UN Security Council approved Resolution 1973, authorizing all necessary measures to protect civilians, including the creation of a no-fly zone and demanding an immediate ceasefire. On March 19th, airstrikes began, led by a coalition formed by the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Italy, hitting defense systems, radar stations, command centers, and advancing tanks. The operation, called Odyssey Dawn, aimed to protect civilians. On March 23rd, NATO took command under Operation Unified Protector, destroying much of Gaddafi's military infrastructure and enforcing an arms embargo, patrolling the Libyan coast, and blocking military supplies. Despite the damage to his military force, Gaddafi remained defiant. He continued to communicate with the public through state television, accusing NATO of trying to colonize Libya. He called the rebels rats and traitors, and promised to cleanse the country street by street. He also accused foreign powers of stealing Libyan oil and interfering in its internal affairs. His regime attempted to shoot down NATO planes using Russian-made surface-to-air missiles, but failed to stop the airstrikes. By mid-2011, the situation on the ground had shifted in favor of the rebels. With NATO continuing to strike Gaddafi's supply routes, weapons depots, and command centers, his military forces were overwhelmed. Rebel groups from the western mountains, the Misrata Front, and eastern Libya began closing in on the capital from different directions. On August 20th, 2011, the rebels launched Operation Mermaid Dawn, their final attack on Tripoli. It was a coordinated plan that included fighters who had been secretly infiltrated into the city earlier. These local fighters rose up from inside the capital, while armed convoys advanced from outside. Over the next 5 days, heavy clashes erupted throughout the city. The neighborhoods of Tajura, Fashloum, and Souk al-Jumah saw intense fighting. Loyalist forces tried to hold their territory using snipers and tanks, but were overwhelmed by the speed of the rebel advance. Many of Gaddafi's soldiers surrendered or abandoned their positions. On August 23rd, the rebels seized Bab al-Azizia, Gaddafi's heavily guarded compound in central Tripoli. This place had been the heart of his government for more than 4 decades. It was fortified with concrete walls, bunkers, and underground tunnels. Inside the compound, the rebels found luxury items, weapons, documents, and signs that Gaddafi had left in a hurry, but the man himself had disappeared. When Tripoli was falling, Gaddafi had already fled. Intelligence reports suggested he had left the city before the final assault, probably between August 19th and 20th. It was believed that he was moving between various safe houses with the help of loyal tribal networks. His family was also on the move. On August 29th, his wife Safia Farkash, daughter Aisha, and sons Hannibal and Mohammed crossed the border into Algeria, where they received temporary refuge. Another son, Saadi Gaddafi, later fled to Niger, where he was detained by the authorities. But Gaddafi decided not to leave Libya. He believed that abandoning the country would mean total defeat. Instead, he chose to hide in areas still controlled by loyal tribes, especially around his hometown of Sirte. Located along the Mediterranean coast, about 450 kilometers from Tripoli and 570 kilometers from Benghazi, Sirte held deep personal significance for him. It was not only his birthplace, but also a city he had developed during his rule, with modern buildings, wide streets, and government offices. He had even hosted African Union summits there, and once proposed that Sirte become the capital of a United States of Africa. Gaddafi arrived in Sirte in early September 2011, accompanied by a steadily shrinking number of loyalists. Most were close advisors, bodyguards, and fighters from the Gaddafi tribe, his own tribe, which had strong influence in the region. 2 of his sons, Muammar Gaddafi, a military commander, and Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, his political heir, were also believed to be moving between hideouts inside and around the city. With Tripoli lost, Sirte became Gaddafi's final stronghold. He was cut off from the rest of the country. Communications were limited. Supplies were scarce, but he was not ready to leave Libya or surrender. In the second week of September, forces of the National Transitional Council began to encircle Sirte. The NTC, now recognized by many countries as Libya's official government, had sent thousands of fighters from different brigades to take the city. Units from Misrata, Benghazi, and Zintan approached from the east and west. The goal was to capture Gaddafi and gain full control of the country. The rebels expected a quick battle, but Sirte proved difficult. Loyalist fighters, including snipers and artillery units, had taken defensive positions throughout the city. They used civilian buildings, houses, schools, and hospitals as cover. The streets were booby-trapped. Landmines and improvised explosive devices were planted along main routes. From mid-September onward, the NTC began an intense bombardment of the city. Grad rockets, mortars, and tank fire struck buildings every day. NATO aircraft also bombed key targets, including bunkers and command centers. Civilians tried to flee, but many were trapped. The city's infrastructure began to collapse. Inside Sirte, Gaddafi and his group continued moving between abandoned houses and underground bunkers to avoid detection. He no longer had a clear command structure. The morale of the loyalists was low, but Gaddafi still gave orders to keep resisting. His son Mutassim remained in charge of the city's defenses and coordinated the final efforts to repel the advancing forces. By the end of September, Sirte was completely surrounded. The NTC controlled the outskirts and began a slow advance, block by block. Sniper fire and street battles made progress slow and deadly. Hundreds of fighters were killed on both sides. NATO planes flew constantly overhead, searching for signs of where Gaddafi might be. Drones and surveillance jets tracked heat signatures and radio signals. Because of this, Gaddafi ordered his group to avoid using phones, radios, or any electronic equipment. Their few satellite phones were rarely turned on, and they relied mainly on human messengers, or couriers, who moved on foot through the city to deliver messages between hideouts. Electricity and water were cut off. The group depended on canned food, dry rations, and the little that could be obtained from damaged stores or brought in by loyal civilians who remained in the city. There were no adequate medical supplies. Wounded fighters were treated with basic tools, and antibiotics were scarce. Gaddafi's group also suffered from hunger, dehydration, and disease due to the dire conditions. Around this time, about 200 fighters still remained loyal to him. Most were from his own tribe and came from Sirte or nearby towns. These men protected Gaddafi closely and formed a small convoy around him whenever they moved. Abu Bakr Yunus Jaber, Libya's former Minister of Defense, was also with them. These men were the last of his inner circle. Eyewitnesses and later reports confirmed that Gaddafi's health was beginning to decline. He had lost weight, looked pale and exhausted, and was no longer the strong, confident figure once seen on Libyan television. His beard had grown longer and whiter. It was said that he suffered from high blood pressure, mild diabetes, and stress-related problems. But despite everything, he remained firm in his decision not to surrender or leave Libya unless he was forced to. He also stayed silent toward the outside world. After the fall of Tripoli, Gaddafi stopped sending out public messages. Unlike at the start of the war, when he appeared regularly on state television, he now avoided cameras completely. He feared that any leak of his location could result in a NATO airstrike. His silence was part of a strategy. He wanted people to believe he might already be dead or somewhere else. Still, he had a plan. His goal was to break through the siege of Sirte and flee south, possibly toward Sabha, a city in the central desert, or even across the border into Niger, where other members of his government had already escaped. But all exit routes were blocked by rebel forces. The roads were watched. Convoys attempting to leave the city were attacked or forced to turn back. With no way out and nowhere safe to hide, Gaddafi's group became more desperate. They began sleeping in shifts. Some fighters kept watch while others rested. They used sandbags and rubble to protect building entrances and to hide vehicles from the view of drones. Even so, their movements were limited, and the constant bombings made life harder with each passing day. By mid-October, it was clear that Gaddafi could not hold out in Sirte much longer, and on October 19th, he made the decision to try to escape. He and his remaining inner circle began preparing to leave the city that night. The plan was to form a convoy of more than 50 vehicles, mostly pickup trucks and SUVs. Many were equipped with mounted machine guns or anti-aircraft weapons. Some carried weapons and ammunition, while others were filled with guards and Gaddafi's personal staff. Among those in the convoy were Muammar Gaddafi, Abu Bakr Yunus Jaber, Mansour Dao, Gaddafi's security chief, and several high-ranking military officers. Some family members were also present. The escape plan was risky. To avoid detection, the convoy planned to leave under the cover of night. Around 8 p.m. on October 19th, they began moving from a hidden location in the city. The vehicles traveled without headlights, trying to stay hidden among buildings and beneath trees. They hoped that the darkness would protect them from airstrikes. The objective was to reach the outskirts of Sirte, then follow a desert route southwest toward Wadi Zamzam, and from there head to Saba, where they would attempt to cross into Niger or Algeria. However, unknown to them, NATO surveillance drones had been monitoring Sirte continuously for weeks. American and French intelligence had been observing unusual movements in the area, looking for signs that Gaddafi might try to flee. That same night, a US MQ-1 Predator drone flying over Sirte detected heat signatures indicating a convoy forming and leaving the city. In the early hours of October 20th, when the convoy reached the western outskirts of Sirte, it was spotted again, this time more clearly. Around 8:30 a.m., NATO made its final move. A US Predator drone, controlled from outside Libya, launched a Hellfire missile directly at the convoy. The missile struck one of the lead vehicles as it moved slowly along the western edge of Sirte. The attack immediately halted the front of the convoy. A few minutes later, French Mirage fighter jets flying over the area dropped laser-guided bombs on the rear of the convoy. Several vehicles exploded in flames. The attack hit both ends of the convoy, trapping those in the middle and causing panic among the rest. Gaddafi's security guards and fighters tried to fight back, but they were outgunned and exposed. Some vehicles were destroyed instantly. Others overturned or crashed as drivers tried to escape the airstrikes. Dozens of loyalist fighters were killed on the spot. Many survivors jumped out and ran toward nearby unfinished buildings, open fields, and a large concrete drainage pipe beneath the road. Gaddafi, Mu'tasim, Mansour Dao, and a small group of others survived the airstrikes and fled on foot. Covered in dust and blood, they hid inside the large, round drainage pipe. The pipe was located near the road, concealed by bushes and debris. It was about 4 feet in diameter, just big enough for a man to crawl through. Inside, the group waited in silence, hoping not to be found. By that time, rebel fighters from Misrata had already moved into the area. They had been following the convoy's path for days and arrived shortly after the airstrike. The rebels were armed with rifles, grenades, and light machine guns. They began carefully searching the area, checking damaged vehicles, nearby buildings, and the surrounding terrain. It didn't take long for them to notice bloodstains and footprints near the road. Some followed the trail and found the entrance to the drainage pipe. First, they threw in a grenade, expecting more guards to be hiding inside. Then they approached for inspection. That was when they saw Gaddafi, crouching inside. He wore brown pants, a blood-stained shirt, and a bulletproof vest. His hair was matted, and his face covered with blood and dirt. He had injuries to his left arm, his back, and his right leg, likely caused by the explosion and debris during the airstrike. They pulled him into the sunlight. He staggered, barely able to walk. Mu'tasim Gaddafi, also wounded but still on his feet, was captured moments later, along with Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr, who was gravely injured. A few others tried to flee the area, but were either killed or captured on the spot. Mansour Dao was among those taken alive. He later confirmed that the group had been attempting to escape to Saba when the airstrike occurred. The rebels dragged Gaddafi to a nearby road. They sat him down and placed him in the back of a pickup truck. By this time, more and more fighters had gathered. News of Gaddafi's capture spread quickly via radio and phones, and many rushed to the scene. As the truck moved forward slowly, people began hitting him with sticks, punches, and rifle butts. Some pulled his hair and tore his clothes. Others shouted insults, some referencing the years of dictatorship, torture, and bombings that Libyans had endured under his rule. A few fighters climbed into the back of the truck to get closer. There was little control over the situation. Several videos, later shared around the world, showed Gaddafi slumped over, bleeding heavily from the head and abdomen. At one point, he tried to sit up, but was forced back down. The violence continued for several minutes as the truck moved through narrow streets crowded with armed fighters. The exact moment of his death remains uncertain. According to medical reports, he was struck in the head and abdomen. Some say he was shot during a struggle in the truck. Others believe a fighter may have deliberately fired. There was no official trial, no formal execution announcement, and no confirmation of who fired the fatal shot. What is known is that when the truck left the outskirts of Sirte and reached a checkpoint controlled by the NTC, Muammar Gaddafi was dead. His body was covered in blood, his shirt torn, and his pants soaked. He had multiple bullet wounds and bruises across his body. Doctors who later examined him confirmed that he died around 1 p.m. on October 20th, 2011, at the age of 69. His body was taken to the city of Misrata, which had suffered greatly during the war. For 3 days, his corpse remained in a meat refrigerator at a local market under the control of the Misrata militia. People lined up in the hundreds to see him. Many took photos or recorded videos. It was a moment of closure for some and of revenge for others. The bodies of Mu'tasim Gaddafi and Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr were also taken to Misrata. Both died shortly after capture. Mu'tasim from a gunshot to the neck and chest, and Jabr from injuries sustained during the convoy attack. On October 23rd, just 3 days later, the NTC officially declared the end of the civil war. After more than 8 months of conflict and over 30,000 deaths, Libya was now under new leadership. After the public displays ended, the question of Gaddafi's burial became urgent. On the night of October 25, 2011, Gaddafi was buried in a remote location in the desert somewhere in western Libya. To this day, the exact site of his grave remains unknown to the public. Gaddafi's end was violent, but it reflected the kind of rule he had maintained for years. Even after his death, many questions remained. Who ordered the final shot? Why was he not put on trial? Could the capture have ended differently? But for many in Libya, that did not matter. His death marked the end of an era. To conclude, understanding his ideology is also very important. During his student years, Muammar Gaddafi was heavily influenced by Gamal Abdel Nasser and adopted the ideologies of Arab nationalism and Arab socialism. In the early 1970s, he formulated his own approach, the Third International Theory, which combined utopian socialism, Arab nationalism, and Third Worldism, ideological currents popular at the time. This theory was detailed in his Green Book, in which he sought to explain the structure of an ideal society and advocated for the unification of the Arab world into a single nation-state. Gaddafi described his economy as based on Islamic socialism, though biographers note that there were Marxist elements in his ideas. He viewed his socialist Jamahiriya, state of the masses, as a model for the Arab, Islamic, and non-aligned worlds. His worldview was shaped by his Islamic faith, Bedouin upbringing, and his resentment of European colonizers in Libya. Gaddafi believed he was fulfilling a divine mission, considering any actions necessary to achieve his goals as legitimate. As a Sunni Muslim, he supported the implementation of Sharia law in Libya and the unity of the Islamic world. Some of his actions reflected this ideology. In 2010, during a visit to Italy, he hired a modeling agency to invite young women to convert to Islam. He also financed the construction and renovation of mosques in Africa, including the Uganda National Mosque. Despite this, he diverged from conservative clerics by encouraging women's participation in traditionally male sectors, such as the armed forces. Another central point of his ideology was anti-Zionism, as he opposed the existence of the State of Israel and saw any Arab compromise with it as betrayal. However, from the late 1990s onward, Gaddafi moderated his stance, advocating for a one-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He also accused the United States of imperialism, mainly because of American support for Israel. Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, God bless you all, and see you soon.